Welcome, everybody. Okay, welcome everybody to ACWR's five-part leadership webinar series. My name is Carlinthia. I'm the past president of ACWR and information governance manager for the Episcopal Church. Just a few rules before we begin. If you could mute your microphone on entry. So for anybody who hasn't muted their microphone, if you could please do that. And when you'd like to ask a question, then please type your question in the chat, or probably in the end when we have the Q&A session, then you could do the raise hand feature and ask your questions. Today we have two presenters. The first presenter is okay with you asking questions during her session, and the second presenter would prefer if you'd ask questions after her session. So this webinar is a five-part series. If anybody's unsure about and it will run from 2024 through 2025. In the chat, I've pasted a flyer dictating the rest of the webinars that will be part of the series. So if you open the chat, you will see that. If you have any questions about the webinar, feel free to email or this webinar series, feel free to email our ACWR National Office, or you should find additional information on our ACWR website. The webinars are free, but registration is required. So today's webinar will be on how to choose an archival repository. And the speakers will address different types of archival repositories that exist and provide information about how to evaluate each program to ensure they fit the needs and values of your community. We'll also hear from one speaker's community experience in selecting a repository for their archival collection, and from the archivist's experience accepting collections from religious communities. So I'll introduce our two speakers. The first is a lay archivist. Her name is Kate Feighery. Kate, you might have to repeat your last name again.
Feighery.
Feighery. And I've known Kate for a while, but I don't know your last name. So she's currently the executive director of the Archives and Records Management at the Archives of the Archdiocese of New York, where she's worked since 2012. She's a certified archivist and records manager, and she serves on the board of the American Catholic Historical Society and as the newsletter editor for the Association of Catholic Diocesan Archivists. The second presenter is Sister Rita Ostry, and she's the Provincial President of the Notre Sisters of Omaha, Nebraska. So we'll begin our presentation with Kate. And again, just lastly, if everyone could mute their microphones and be sure to paste your questions in the chat or save them for after, use the raise hand feature. For Kate's presentation, you could ask questions during her presentation. All right, you could go ahead, Kate.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay, great. So good afternoon, and thank you all. Michelle Lewandowski is not here, but she's the one that invited me to speak, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I know you all have some important decisions to make about your records, so hopefully this will help you. So I'm the archivist, as Carlintha said, for the Archdiocese of New York. So I'm going to speak specifically about my experience transferring religious collections to the diocese. However, a lot of what I had to say, I tried to make as general as possible so that you can hopefully apply it wherever you decide to transfer your collections. So here at the Archdiocese of New York, we have the collections of 4 different religious orders. So the first order that we received back in 2015 was the collection from the Sisters of the Divine Compassion, which is a diocesan religious order. The work of the order started in the 1870s, providing immigrant children and their families with education, employment opportunities, and other supports. In 1886, the group formally became the Religious Sisters of the Divine Compassion and expanded into Westchester County. As the order grew, the sisters moved into education, opening an elementary, high school, and college on their mother house property, as well as staffing many of the elementary schools throughout the Archdiocese. After Vatican II, the sisters expanded into social service work, healthcare, and counseling. Due to declining vocations and the cost of keeping up such a large property, and also the cost of caring for an aging population, in 2015, the congregation was forced to sell its Westchester County property, which included its mother house where the archives were stored. The closure and sale of the property happened very quickly, leaving the sisters with a lot to juggle, most particularly finding housing for all of the sisters who were residing at the mother house. One of the priests who offered weekday mass for the sisters also had worked in the archives. They reached out to him for assistance on what to do with their collections, which is how the Archdiocese archives became involved. The Sisters of Our Lady of the Christian Doctrine, our second collection, were founded in 1910 by a wealthy Protestant convert with the goal of assisting European immigrants in the Lower East Side of Manhattan through settlement work. In 1924, they acquired property in rural Nyack, New York, and established the Marydale Mother House and Novitiate. In addition to providing a residence for their settlement house children outside of New York City in the summers, Marydale also became home to Camp Marydale, which ran each summer until 1989, and then transitioned into the Marydale Faith and Life Center. Although a diocesan order, by the 1950s, the sisters expanded to serve communities in Florida, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and South Carolina. The sisters became increasingly involved in the religious education of children, and their methods were influential in the establishment of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine. By 2017, the few remaining sisters were dedicated to see the continuing life of their faith center and decided to donate 30 acres of their property to the New York State Land Trust. The remaining 9 acres were put into a conservation easement, which guaranteed that they would never be more developed than they currently are. As part of this downsizing, the sisters sold a house they owned outside of the property, which had been the home of their archives. They were interested in reuniting the material stored there with another piece of their collection, which had been transferred to Fordham University about a decade before. At the time of the closure, the university was unable to accept new material, and the sisters were looking for a place that would be able to house the entire collection and reached out to the Archdiocese. In 2018, the sisters entered into a covenant agreement with the Dominican Sisters of Spark Hill. And though fewer than 10 sisters are still alive today, they continue to actively add to their materials here in the archive. And actually, they just dropped off 2 bags about 20 minutes before I started talking to you all. So, the third collection is the Franciscan Sisters of Peace, which is another diocesan community founded in 1986 by a group of 112 sisters that broke off from the larger community of the Franciscan Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart in Peekskill. They are engaged in a variety of ministries, including teaching, religious education, and spiritual direction. Although this congregation still has a number of living members, they did not have many additional vocations behind the original 112, so they too are looking toward the future for their legacy. Their former archivist felt she was no longer able to fill the role, and they had no one to take her place, so we're looking for a new solution for their materials. The Archdiocesan Vicar for Religious made the connection between the community and the archives here. And then the fourth collection is that of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament and Our Lady, also known as the Sacramentine Nuns. The sisters are a cloistered order devoted to the perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. This is the only collection that we hold that has an international presence. The congregation was founded in France in 1659 by a Dominican priest. However, all the houses of this order are autonomous. The Sacramentines arrived in the Archdiocese in 1911, and then in the 1950s, a few of the nuns from Yonkers broke off and moved to Michigan, where they established a new community. After their school and monastery closed in the 1980s, the order relocated several times, all within the boundaries of the Archdiocese. In 2021, with only 4 sisters remaining, they made the decision to close their monastery, with all of the sisters planning to relocate to a nearby nursing home. the Archdiocesan Vicar for Religious again assisted the sisters in connecting with the archives. So the brief descriptions were just to give you a sense of the differences between the orders whose collections we hold at the Archdiocese archives. While I can speak generally to the process of transferring all of these collections, it's really important to understand that the experience of each transfer was very different, depending on the circumstance of the order themselves and the status of the material in their collections. Speaking from the receiving end of the transaction, there are a number of questions that I needed to address with each order before any final decision was made. However, these issues are not unique to any of the collections we have here, and they are something that any order should consider before transferring a collection, and any repository should consider before accepting. So one of the most important questions for any transfer of archival material is the size of the collection. How much material is there? And is there space in the repository to house all of the items that will be transferred? Tying into this is the scope of the collection. What materials are in the collection? Is it all paper-based? Are there oversized items like blueprints or maps? Are there items with special storage consideration like photographs, artifacts, scrapbooks, slides, video, clothing, artwork? Does the repository have the appropriate storage for these types of materials? If the answer to this question is no, what would happen to them if you choose to transfer the paper material? Another tricky issue surrounds school records, which many religious orders might have in their collections. A lot of repositories, if they're not familiar with school records, do not have a process in place for fulfilling student record or transcript requests from former students. How will this be handled? If you do have these in your collection, I think we all know it's really important to have a timely response for the people that are looking for their records. If the repository is unwilling to put a process in place to respond to school record requests, what happens to this piece of your collection, and how can you ensure that the request will be handled in a timely manner moving forward? Another similar issue to consider comes up around orphanage records. While all of the collections that we have here have been from orders active in New York State, so we haven't had to worry too much about differences in state law, but it is something you need to be aware of. For example, until very recently, New York State had very strict privacy laws regarding what kind of information you could give out about adoptions, which could be noted in orphanage records. Would the repository, if it was in a different state, respect the same restrictions? How would that be handled? From a more philosophical point, does the collection remain complete if it's split between different repositories? Will an incomplete collection still tell the story of your order? And another point to consider, does the order own all of the material that you're looking to transfer? If not, who is the owner? Who is responsible for making those decisions about transfer? Will the repository accept material of unknown ownership? Once both sides are confident that the repository has adequate space for the collection and can care for all the different items included, the next question for both sides is organization. Does your order have an archivist, or did you at one point? Did she or he process the collection? That is it organized? Is there a guide to finding materials in the collection? Is the material stored in a way that meets archival standards? The answer to these questions raises new questions. For the order, will the repository require the collection to be organized before they will accept the material? Does either the order or the repository have the staff and the time to take on the project? Or will the collection just be added to the archives backlog and be mostly inaccessible? Do either or both sides have the budget to cover any archival supplies that are needed? Another question that both sides need to address is, will the collection continue to grow? Is the material transferred at the point of agreement the bulk of the collection, or is it expected to grow significantly in the coming years? If it's expected to grow, Does the repository have the space for additional materials? These questions can sound really daunting, I know. But I've found over the years that the best way to work through it all is just to keep open communication with the order and the archives. Before we moved anything here, I visited the archives of each group many times. We talked about how the material was stored, the best way to pack it, labeling the boxes, what should and shouldn't be included in the move, how much work the sisters needed to do or didn't need to do on the materials. We tried to talk out any situation that might come up or any questions that the order had or that I had so that we both felt as comfortable with what was going on as possible. I definitely learned more with each subsequent move, and there were things the first time around I would have never thought of that by the fourth time were sort of on my standard list of questions. But even with all of that, issues still came up that I didn't expect. So for example, one order, their archives was really well organized. It had been processed by an archivist. They had a very in-depth finding aid. It was in great shape. We moved the collection to the archive, and then the sisters tried to send the finding guide to me, only to find out that the guide was on one computer in an outdated format that the sisters couldn't extract. So they ended up just moving the entire computer to the archive so that we would be able to access the finding guide. And, it worked out. It was fine. But just kind of being able to talk out different things like that is always really helpful. So once you find a repository and both sides are confident that the repository can adequately support the materials, the next most important part is a deposit agreement. These can have other names, like a deed of gift, but it's basically a legal agreement between the order and the repository, which protects both you, your archives, and the repository. In the Archdiocese, I have a draft version of the deposit agreement, which you can see here. The boilerplate was reviewed by our legal counsel. So for all of the collections that we accept, this is the document I start with. And then both sides will edit based on the specific community, the materials, and what the specific needs might be. I'm happy to send a larger version of this to anyone that might be interested in it. I know it can be hard to see on the screen. But I really can't stress this enough. Even though the Archdiocese Legal Counsel has reviewed and approved this, every time I send it to a community, I recommend that they get their own lawyer to review it as well. The agreement is supposed to protect both sides, and no one knows your community and your collections as well as you do. So just get someone to review any agreement before you sign it. No matter how many other congregations may have signed a similar agreement before you came along to the repository, it doesn't matter. This is the legacy of your community, and it's really important to make sure any agreement you sign says what you want it to say. So the deposit agreement can touch on a lot of different areas, starting from the most basic, which is the actual move of the physical material. So some questions that it can address are who pays for the move? Who's responsible for arranging the movers? Are there insurance requirements from either side that the moving company needs to meet before the move? Are the materials packed? If not, who will be packing them? What would you do with oversized items that would now be stored in flat file cabinets? How do you arrange those for the move? Ownership and copyright are another really important area that the deposit agreement can address. Physically transferring material does not necessarily transfer ownership of it, and you want to make sure to spell out as clearly as possible the rules for who does own it and if and when that will change. Does ownership of the material transfer to the repository upon arrival, or does it stay with the order? Will it ever transfer? If it will transfer, what will be the trigger? A date? Another event? Although you might not yet be ready to transfer ownership, the repository might feel differently. If they're taking responsibility for the physical material, they might also require that they take ownership. Is that something that you and your congregation are comfortable with? If it's not, the repository might not be the right fit for your material. Just because someone's saying this is the way we do it doesn't mean it's the only way that it could be done. Going back to what I just said, this is your collection, and you just really need to make sure that your leadership team are comfortable with every part of the transaction. And although you might not be ready to transfer ownership yet, another thing to consider is when or if that might happen. Realistically, if your community is facing completion, it has to happen. No repository is going to accept a collection that in 20 years or 50 years legally has no owner. There has to be someone at all points that will be able to make decisions about and for the collection. And realistically, it's in the best interest of your community to have the question worked out. In many years from now, you don't want one person being stuck trying to work out all of the moving parts involved in this last bit of the transfer. That's not to say that the ownership has to transfer now, but it would make sense to put a date or an event in the deposit agreement that would trigger the ownership transfer. It's a tough conversation that involves a lot of decisions and a lot of emotions, but it's really something that you should address internally before you move your collection anywhere. So another thing to consider are any extra costs that might be associated with caring for your collection. So for example, we discovered mold in one of the collections after it arrived at the archives. And we had the deposit agreement that addressed sort of extra costs like this, which allowed us to go back to the community and make some recommendations about the best path forward. And then also, is there a charge associated with housing the collection at a repository? Is it a one-time fee, an annual fee? Is it based on how much material you have? Will it change in the future? What happens if the community can no longer pay the fee? What would happen to the material? So that should also be something in the deposit agreement. So another thing the deposit agreement can address is the privacy of your collection or any restrictions that are placed on the material. So some questions to ask are, is your collection currently open to researchers? Is anyone allowed to view or use the materials, or is it only accessible to members of the community? Once you transfer the collection, would there be restrictions that you would want to put in place? And would the repository be willing to honor these restrictions? If you want to restrict use, is there any point in the future when you could foresee opening these pieces of the collection? Are there other materials, for example, the sisters' files, that would never be allowed to be viewed by someone outside of the community? If someone wants to use the collection for research, will they need permission for the community? Who does the repository contact for that permission, and how will it be communicated if that person should change? Many repositories, particularly ones where most of the collections are open for research, will probably expect your collection to be open as well. This is something that both sides need to agree on before any transfer. Because if you send it thinking no one will look at it, and the repository accepts it thinking, they can digitize all the images and put them online, that's obviously going to cause some problems. So, opening the material to researchers is part of making it part of the historical narrative. So it is important, but once again, it really just needs to be something that's comfortable to you, your community, your leadership team. Depending on how much work has been done to your collection already, the question of disposition of materials comes up. So if your collection is fully processed and has a finding guide, there probably isn't anything in there that wouldn't be considered archival. However, if the archives have just sort of been collecting over the years without anyone doing any weeding work on it, there probably is material in there that doesn't need to be. So one thing that you would want the deposit agreement to address is who can make the decision about disposition, how should the materials be disposed of, who would be the point person in the community for the repository to contact with any questions about this. And then another issue is, what if everyone changes their mind? What if you get so far along, you move the materials, it's there for a couple of years, and either you or the repository decide this isn't working for whatever reason? Is there a contingency in the deposit agreement that allows you to change your mind? For example, if the collection isn't being cared for in the way that you were promised or the way that you hoped, what are your options? What can you do about that? Um, I'm beating a dead horse a little bit at this point, but everything in the deposit agreement just comes back to making both sides as comfortable as possible with what is happening. It's protecting both sides, and it's making sure that the important pieces of information are covered. One thing the deposit agreement is never going to help with are the emotions that come with moving your collection out of your hands to any other repository, whether it's a diocesan archive, a college or university, or a collaborative archive. What the deposit agreement can do is help you make sure all of the logistics are laid out as clearly and as detailed as possible so that you feel confident the material will be protected. I'm happy to answer any questions about my specific experiences, but I hope that this general overview gave you some insight into what I think about when an order reaches out about moving materials. Really good luck to all of you as you sort of struggle with this very important decision. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, please reach out. Even if you're not deciding to move it to a diocesan archive, I think there's a lot of similarities in transferring any collections. So if there's anything I can do, my contact information is up here, so please feel free.
Thank you, Kate. Since no one had no immediate questions for Katie in the chat, we'll just move on to Sister Rita, and then we'll have our Q&A session after. Unless you'd like to address that comment, Kate.
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of, Parchment is one, needmytranscript.com is another one. So definitely those are options too. I don't really know. We handle our school record requests in-house, so I'm not really sure of the costs associated with them. But the question with that comes up, like if you digitize all of your school records through one of these third-party companies that make them available, what happens to the physical records? Do you still have to keep them? There's just so many state and federal laws around education records that I feel like that could be its own presentation, but just something to be aware of. Those services are great for responding to requests, but the question of what to do with the physical records still exists.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Sister Rita, you could go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Sister Rita from the Notre Dame Sisters in Omaha, Nebraska. We are a province of an international congregation, and we are the only province in the United States. Our generalate is in the Czech Republic. We are now a province of 27 members and have been on this journey since 2018, thinking about where we want our archives to go. And it was after the workshop envisioning the future of Catholic religious archives in Boston that we became very concerned about this. At that workshop, I met many helpful people and knowledgeable, as well as many valuable resources. It reinforced the importance of finding a suitable place for our archives because we all have much to share into the future. And it provided an opportunity to network with others who were deeply involved and dedicated to preserving our information. I had been supervising our archivist for a couple years, and she did an amazing job in organizing our archives, but continually questioned, what do I really share? What do we need to pass on? And as a result, I contacted Malachi McCarthy, who was in charge of that workshop that we attended, and he led me to Lisa Shell. She came to visit us this past a year or so ago after we had been searching various places to place our archives. We started with local archives right here in Omaha. We contacted the Historical Society of Omaha and found out they wouldn't take anything unless it was related to Omaha, Nebraska. Well, we had missions in throughout Nebraska, throughout Iowa, South Dakota, Colorado, Pennsylvania. Some of our sisters served in international missions. So we didn't think that would be a appropriate place. So then we went to the state archives in Lincoln, Nebraska. We came to serve Czech immigrants in 1910 and serve in settlements in Nebraska. Here again, we didn't want to break up the archive material, so that didn't help too much either. We checked the Archdiocesan archives, and at this time, we don't find it actively engaging, and so we decided we needed something where we could really work together. However, the Archdiocese has a museum called the Cathedral Arts, which we have placed our traditional habits. So that's on display there. And then at that time, the collaborative archives were beginning. And HARC, the Heritage and Resource Center, Sisters of Holy Cross of Notre Dame, Indiana, were developing their collaborative center. And we found out it felt much larger than what we really had to offer. So, and we also became aware of the Collaborative Archive Center in Chicago that's being developed. And again, those were much larger than we felt we had to offer. And of course, we were very much aware that universities and colleges were available to us. We also have a connection with the Czech Museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where our sisters have ministered for quite a while. And we've been talking with them and to them. The criteria that we really used was we wanted our archives to be available for the preservation and availability for research of the legacy of the life of women religious and the contribution of their service and ministries to the church and throughout the world. Another important factor was we were looking for an area in the Midwest where most of our ministries are located and were known. So we're here in Omaha, and Creighton University is practically next door to us. And Lisa encouraged us to visit with Creighton University. And when we visited with them, they were very open to accepting our archives and help. And they said, we have the archives of the Jesuits, and bringing in women religious would really balance our archival materials. So it has been a very blessed relationship at this point. We're in very beginning stages, still working out various agreements. We've hired a part-time. Our archivist was a self-made archivist. She didn't get a degree in archival work. But over the years, she was a great historian, a great organizer, and developed and organized our archives very well. So this past April, we hired an archivist to begin compiling our repository according to the way Creighton processes materials that enter their archives. It has been a very enlightening and helpful collaboration, and we're in those beginning stages, but we feel this is the right fit for us where we are, in that it can be used into the future in an area where we're known. So if you have any questions, I'm open to them. And I will put my email address in the chat box if you want to email me later on after you think about things.
All right, thank you, Sister Rita. So this is the end of our presentation. Does anybody have any questions for the presenters or any other statements? Again, you feel free to raise your hand or you can unmute your microphone. Yes, Noreen.
Yes. Sister Rita, there was one name I lost. After you contacted Malachi McCarthy, who was it that you got in touch with?
Lisa Shell. She's the archivist for the Adrian Dominicans.
Okay.
She came out for a week and reviewed our archives, helped us develop a next step plan. Very, very helpful to us.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, and if anyone is looking for an archives consultant, Lisa Shell, like a few other archivists, are on the ACWR archives consultant directory. Kate, I don't know if you're on that, but if you go to the ACWR website, you'll find it. I think Victoria just posted it in the chat, and we'll be updating that in case any other archivist wants to be added to that. So you could find somebody in your region. Anybody else? Let me see. Well, thank you, Sister Rita. Yeah, go ahead.
This really isn't a question for either Kate or Sister Rita. I'm in New Jersey, and one of the places we're thinking about is the new collaborative archives at Boston University. Has anybody successfully gotten in touch with Michael Burns? I try repeatedly, and he talks to me on the phone or he sends me an email, but I can't get any information from him. I'm wondering if any of you have succeeded in reaching him.
So well, the last to him, I guess it was a long time compared to now. It was last year, but I did in person. He actually frequently responds to my emails. And my previous congregation recently signed their agreement, the Dominican Sisters of Hope in Ossining.
Oh, yeah.
I know, so from what I know, they hired a couple archivists recently. I think that was in maybe last year or the year before. So I don't know, since they've hired the archivist, how responsive he is. Maybe you might have to reach out to them.
Okay, I'll give that a try. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sister Noreen, if you know Sister Kathleen Gorman at the Spark Hill Dominicans.
No.
I was just talking to her last week, and I think that she also is speaking with him. So I think they've been in active contact as well.
Okay, I'll get in touch with her. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. I just wanted to touch up on something Kate said when we're talking about not knowing what to do with the physical copies when you make those digital copies on parchment. So normally, because I guess since I don't really deal with adoption records, I might not be aware of the regulation around that. But normally, for when it comes to privacy and protection of records and with record management, if you designate a digital copy now your official record copy, generally in those moments you could probably get rid of, if you have substantial reason to, your physical copy.
So I think that parchment is only for school records. I don't think it does orphanage records. But I think the issue that you just want to be aware of when working with one of those companies is that you get a copy back. Like they don't digitize your records and not send you a copy, and then you destroy the physical ones and they go out of business and you're left with nothing. So you just want to make sure if you work with them. I know that, we've had school records covered in mold and stuff that we've been able to make digital surrogates of and get rid of the original, but just make sure you get the digital copy.
And I think Veronica posted something about Michael. Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with that too. If there were condition issues that kind of forced, after digitizing as much as you can, especially when it comes to school records or any of those kinds of sensitive, like transcripts or health records, orphanage records, just having some kind of documentation about what happened and the condition that they were in and why they were pitched. I would think that's good to keep with the collection long term, just in case there are legal issues down the road, that you do have that provenance about, what happened and why they were discarded.
Mhm. Anybody else with any questions, any comments? Oh, somebody just entered.
Thank you.
No.
I was just going to chime in on one other thing too, the importance of having a consultant come to review your collection, no matter where you're considering where it's going to go. It's very helpful, even if you have an archivist in place, just to have someone from an outside perspective come in and help with forming sort of some objectives, or at least a timeline of things that they're seeing that really need to be addressed, and working with whatever the repository is that you're deciding to transition the collection to work on what they're expecting, and just helping to get a game plan essentially. And so many that we've shared in our ACWR consultants directory. I mean, that's not something that we do for a living. There's definitely a whole bunch of people that do that more on the corporate side, but we women religious archivists, we know we're a very niche crowd, and that this is a moment in time where it's kind of an all hands on deck situation to help. So there's a lot of folks that have stepped up already. And as Carlinthia shared, we're hoping to put another directory out next year, so you might see some more names. And there's also the opportunity to at least start some conversations. There's a lot that would do virtual if you can't find someone in your specific region, to at least kind of get the conversation started.
Yeah, that was my other thought. Beth.
I'm wondering if we could get a copy from Kate of the agreement that you have used with your repository.
Yep, I think Veronica said if I send it to her, she'll send it out to all of you.
Thank you.
Yep, and that'll include people that haven't attended live today. So if you have some folks on that weren't able to make it, I'll send it out to all of the registrants.
All right. Well, I guess last call for any questions or any comments. I'm just looking around to make sure. Kate, will your presentation be available in case?
You guys recorded it, right?
Yeah, but I was just wondering the PowerPoint in case anybody.
Yeah, sure. I'll send it to Veronica with the template.
Yeah, okay. All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. Our next presentation will actually be, I believe, on November 13th. And that is Understanding Archival Agreement. So basically the agreement that was showed by Kate, our presenters will delve more into understanding those agreements. So thank you so much, Kate, and thank you so much, Sister Rita. And thank you all of you for participating, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.